We are recording now.
Да, спасибо большое всем, кто сегодня решил посетить.
Thank you very much to everyone who decided to come today. Today, we are going to speak about a complicated and quite emotional thing as collaborationism and Holocaust on an example of Ukrainian police in Kyiv. And in the beginning, I wanted to briefly mention that there is no concrete definition of the term collaborationism. And the first case of using this word is usually connected to Vichy's regime in France. When Marshal Pétain, after meeting with Hitler, someone should mute. Thank you. Philippe Pétain, after a meeting with Hitler, has proclaimed that between the Vichy regime and the Hitler regime, there is collaboration happening from now on. And the meaning of this was the maximum nivellation of the inequality between the German side and the French side. But in the Soviet historiography, collaborationism is usually described as a betrayal of the homeland and something which was happening by and practiced by some marginalized elements. But actually, if we look into who collaborated, the landscape of the motives of people who were collaborating with Nazis is really diverse. So motivations were diverse, and people had really different ideological views and orientations. So you couldn't really say that they were, for example, opposing Bolshevism or betraying the Soviet state. So, for instance, it's really weird to speak about Galicia in the sense because these people have been living under the Soviet Union only for a really brief period of time, and for them, German was actually closer German language than Russian language. So they have not been betraying something which they have actually been part of. And we also need to take into account that collaborationism has really diverse kinds of it. So it's not that people really had right-wing views or have been sharing the same ideas as Nazis had. Sometimes these were bureaucrats who just ended up in the state structures after the state was taken over by the Nazi regime. Sometimes these were agricultural workers that stayed on the territories where Germans came. And collaborationism, it doesn't mean that these people were actually taking part in crimes. They were not killing people directly. So I would see this term as a neutral and use it as a neutral term. Under collaborationism, I mean collaboration of local inhabitants with German occupational structures. And also maybe to define the term Ukrainian police, it is not one structure, but several structures which we have been transforming, merging with each other, dividing again throughout the war. And the ethnical component of the term Ukrainian, it's rather about the region where this part of the police have been formed. So it's territorial, it's not ethnic. For instance, in Kyiv, in Ukrainian police, most of the workers have been from Kyiv and the surrounding territories, but also Russians, Polish, and Germans have been part of it. And similar situation has, for example, been present in Belarus or in Poland, that it was ethnically diverse. So departing from all that I said, we can say that there is no specific collaborationism of one concrete kind of people, especially of an ethnic group. So everywhere people going to collaborate with the police and serve there throughout the war, they had really different motivations for that. So certain part has been participating in extermination of the Jewish population, and also the Bolsheviks, for example, have been doing this, but these are not all people who collaborated. For example, this is one example. This is the 13th battalion of the police. And these people have been participating in liquidation of 2 ghettos in Belarus in 1943. Or another example, this is Russian police in Smolensk. This police in 1942 has taken 2,000 Jewish people outside of the city and killed them. So on this picture, you can see different elements of clothing which they have. For example, you can see that they have not yet been given uniform. So they still have normal clothes, which they wore before. Also, we can take into account that Germans were working with these local police forces in a different ways. They have been using the divide and rule logics. And one example is what happened in Minsk in 1941. And there, and also in Hatyn, in another region of Belarus, forces of Ukrainian police have been taken part. So this was an example of divide and rule tactics that Ukrainians were taken to Belarus to exterminate local population. And in the beginning, it was quite chaotic how these forces were forming. So in Ukraine, you had different groups of nationalists of different orientation, which you could call more pro-Bolshevik and anti-Bolshevik, and like the most known groups are Banderovцы and Melnikovцы. One group, Banderovцы, was more radical, and the other one was more pro peaceful kind of resolution of questions and pro-collaboration. And these groups, almost from the first days of German occupation of Ukraine, have been coming into the occupied territories and organizing in the local administrations. So local administrations have been mostly controlled by this Ukrainian nationalist forces by 1943. And in each little town, they have been creating militia, public militia, which then became kind of a heart of the future Ukrainian army of Ukraine as an independent state. Here you can see on the photo this people's militia. On this person's arm, there is a band. It is yellow and blue. And this is a photo from the first days of the 1941, when the first exterminations of Jewish ghettos were happening in Ukraine. And on the right, there is a document of a policeman from Lviv. So the German name, which Daniil just mentioned, Ukrainische Militia, is the similar term to which Daniil now says. But in historiography, sometimes it's described differently as something which is like a semi-police or a helping troops of police. But actually, the activities of this kind of troops, they have not been different from what police did in the Second World War or anywhere else. So they have been actively participating in different crimes against Jewish people. Also, the start of the war in the Soviet Union has been, for many parts of the socialist bloc, a start for nationalist movements, local ones. This was the case in Baltic states, this was the case in Belarus, and also this was a case in Russia, that some right-wing nationalist movements have been started. And the same in Ukraine, and all these movements have been seeing the war as a way to counter the Bolsheviks and kick them out of basically the territories, to then create independent states on these territories. And to use the war in these goals, you needed an instrument, so your own military forces. And in the first years of war, the Germans didn't let anyone to create such forces, but they did let them create this little kind of troops, the same as this police troops. And now I will concentrate on the Ukrainian case, even though the similar cases were also present in the other countries. So in 1941, Ukrainian state was proclaimed as an independent state, independent from the Soviet Union. And I would say that there was no active counter movement from the German side to not let this nationalist movements do what they wanted to do, to develop their own kind of ways of countering the Bolsheviks. One example could be Stepan Suletytsky, who was working as a military translator for the German troops located in Kyiv. And he was in contact with officers. And he also was communicating with Germans when the nationalists in Kyiv wanted to do something. So they have been able to avoid conflict with Germans and actually do what they wanted to do. And the initiative was mostly taken by Milukovцы, by this more peaceful nationalist group, which was the second one in comparison to Banderovцы, who were more radical. So this Milikov nationalist group has taken over Zhytomyr and the region around it. And in Kyiv, it was a bit different. Little groups of Milikovs, this more peaceful nationalists, they have entered Kyiv together with Germans, and they started to organize the local administration. So here on these photographs are the organizers who started the local police in Kyiv. This first person, called Yaroslav Gaivas, has left some memoirs, which are also interesting to study. The second person was a captain of police before in Ukraine. And the third person was not any kind of public figure, but was also important in the movement. And all three people have pseudonyms, because this is like a thing which for all nationalists was important, to use something else instead of the name of the surname. in September, around 150 people, former members of the Red Army, of the Soviet Army, have been brought to Kyiv. And these people have been specifically selected by the nationalist organization to become the force of the police, of the new police which they have been forming. And the idea was to build a new successful movement, and this movement took new cadres, new people from the labor camps in Zhytomyr. And people in the camp were even competing to leave the camp and become policemen. And Ukrainians have been actively supporting this. And the Germans have also been kind of looking who is collaborating the best in the camp and then choosing the ones who are more loyal to them. But it also would, like this way of recruiting people meant that really diverse people ended up in the police. So of really diverse background, class background, and ideological background. This is an example of a newspaper ad, which advertised the job in the Ukrainian police. It's from 1941. So it says that the person should be from 21 to 35. It should be healthy. The person should be healthy. Also quite tall, Ukrainian by nationality. The person couldn't before serve in Soviet criminal police, so this person should have been kind of free from this background and also free from any criminal background. But it was also quite weird because most of the people before the war in the Soviet Union have already had some criminal cases in the Soviet Union because of Gulag, because of collectivization. So it was really hard to find a person who has not had any criminal background in the USSR. So this kind of point has been taken out at some point out of the ad. And so only the age and the health condition were left. So the structure of the personnel, it has shifted throughout the time, and it also depended on the time. So, and also dependent on the rank of the person. So the persons who have been ruling the police, they have been this nationalist from this nationalist movement of Melnikovs, and also the former white immigrants, like the anti-Bolshevik immigrants from Ukraine, who has before migrated from the Soviet Union and now came back with the war. So they had a big experience of fighting Bolsheviks from the civil war in the USSR, and they have lived in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in France, and Germany. And then when the war started, they have seen in it a possibility to make Ukraine independent. And they have created the Ukrainian General Council of Combatants in Europe, which was helping different people who wanted to fight for this Ukrainian independence to come to certain parts of Ukraine and start doing military, administrative, or political activities there. So by the beginning of 1942, several hundreds of these former immigrants have been already moved to Kyiv. So in 1941, Himmler has published a treaty which called for creation of this independent police organs from the local population of the occupied regions. It's a part of this treaty from an archive in Germany. And here you see that it's not Ukrainische Militia anymore, which was a case before, and a name is changed to Schutzmannschaft. And in the second part, different parts of this police are described, which I will talk about a bit later. So in November 1941, this comes out, and German officials start to come to Ukrainian territories at the same time. And they try to take the control of local organs which have been established by Ukrainian nationalist forces. So the hegemony of Ukrainians started to weaken, and all instructions which were different from the ones which Nazis wanted to have, they have been cancelled de facto. And the most visible nationalists, they have been killed. For example, the 3 portraits which I showed, they have all been exterminated. And at this point in Kyiv, there was decentralization of local police, and several organs have been created. One is closed forces. So it's this line which Daniil just read in the document. These were police troops, the first of which was called Kyiv, and it was formed from the former inmates of a camp in Zhytomyr, and of one of the nationalist troops, which was created in the region of Bukovina, which was a part of Romania, of the Romanian occupied territories back then. And so they came to Kyiv to fight Bolsheviks, basically, as well. And this battalion Kyiv, from the Zhytomyr and Bukovina people, it has been transformed into 2 special forces, which then started to fight partisans outside of the city, outside of Kyiv, in Ukraine, and in Belarus. So this extermination of Jewish ghettos is what they did, basically, in Belarus, in Minsk and in Khatyn. So here is, for example, a picture of one of those troops in 1943 in Belarus. The photograph has been taken. And on the right, you can see the information about all police battalions that have been on the territory of Ukraine in 1943. Also, Latvian and Polish troops are here, not only Ukrainian troops. They all had their numbers, and you can see that a battalion which was formed in Kyiv, they had similar numbers, and people from other regions, they kind of got different numbers. The goals were fighting against partisans, and usually we think that maybe these partisans were only like the Soviets, the former members of the army, but actually it is not true. Partisans were also Jews, for example, who were hiding in the forest, or agricultural workers who ran from the cities not to stand the Germans and then hid in the forest, and they all were called partisans, as if they would resist with arms. So in the reports, the victims of the fights was partisans are described as communists, Jews, and members of the Soviet secret police. So the second kind of police, which was active in Kiev, was Kievan police. This is a patrol force, which was directly under the command of the German police forces based in Kiev. And it had a district police in each of the 11 districts of Kiev. And each of these local forces has its own commissariat, its own building, and its own head. And in every department, there was a German leader and some German soldiers who were controlling its operations. So this is example of one of these polices in one of the districts of Kiev. So in the middle, there is like a head of this police troop. And on the sides, there are other German parts of this police troop. Ukrainian security police was the biggest of these different police forces created by Germans. It was around 1,500 people only in Kiev in 1942. And the people who worked there, they were controlling the order in the city. If someone was stealing something, they have been stopping them from it, controlling the order on the streets. And they were perceived as people who have been committing crime due to their private reasons or ambitions. They have not only been helping Germans to do what they wanted to do, for example, to send more Jews into labor camps, but they have been also expropriating private property or money from people because they could profit from it. And the last institution was called Ukrainian Security Police or Ukrainian Criminal Police. And this activity has not been covered in literature almost, even though it was closely connected with Holocaust. Within the Ukrainian police, investigation department was formed. And a person called Roman Medan was a part of it. And it started to create this part of the police. And they have been mostly investigating different crimes of administrative, political, or criminal character. For instance, they have been investigating the arrests of different people in the Soviet Union. And the German security forces have been directly controlling the actions of this police. So here you can see how the criminal police department in Warsaw looked like in 1941. They were all in civic clothes. These were investigators, agents. They have all had private guns with them. And they were supposed to work as agents and do investigations privately. In Kiev, these were mostly former members of Einsatzkommando 5. So you can see that they most likely had views which were closely linked to torture, violence, and mass extermination of Jews. On the next slide, scenes of violence and torture will be present. So if you have issues with this, maybe you can switch the video off for some time or kind of roll down the screen and just listen to me. So the police has from 1941 started exterminating Jews in different parts of the Ukraine, mostly men. This is one of the most famous photographs. The German name of it is the last Jew of Vinnytsia, it's just written here. And these words have also been written on the photograph when it was found. And the person who is shooting is most likely is a member of Einsatzgruppe or of SS. However, in 80s, 90s, the German historians have been also describing that like normal participants of the German army, normal soldiers, have been even more participating in the killings of Jews. So it was not specifically a case of the special forces of SS that they conducted Holocaust, but also it was a general thing which everyone take part in. And that's why so many people have been killed, and that's why also women and children started to be killed. And Kamensk-Podolsk, one of the cities in Ukraine, is usually described as a turning point from which mass extermination of Jews went really high. So in this village, people who had been mostly from Hungary or from Carpathian region have been exterminated almost fully. In Berdichie, also September, 13,000 of Jews have been killed. In Vinnytsia, in the same monument, after the events portrayed on the photograph, around 15,000 of Jews have been exterminated. Dieter Pohl, the German historian, and describes that in a month from August to September, up to 1,000 Jews have been killed, mostly women and children. And looking into literature in Ukraine, you usually see that the Ukrainian police was not taking part in this event. They could not take part in this event, they say, because it has been on the stage of reorganization. And it's true that in 1941, reorganization was happening. However, there was already a functioning office of local police in Ukraine, already contingent, like the new members of police have been recruited. In the beginning of September, the force has already been existing. And with mass extermination of Jews has started, around 150 to 230 policemen have already been working in Kyiv. It is a photograph recently found. It was taken on the 29th of September of 1941 in Kyiv. You see Jews going in the direction of Babi Yar. There was an announcement the day before that all Jews should gather on the crossing of two streets with warm clothing, with valuables. They should come there to be evacuated. And here is a word play. In German documents, you see the words like relocation, evacuation. And before the Second World War, these actions, they have meant this, what they actually signify. And after the start of the war, they have become euphemisms. So evacuation meant mass extermination, mass shooting of people. And when this happened, Ukrainian police was led by Ukrainian nationalists. And one of the members of Yaroslav, who was on one of the photographs before, remembers that local forces have demanded from local German forces have demanded from Ukrainian police officers to be present during the cases of mass extermination. Also, a document was found that around 100 of Ukrainian police forces are asked to come and participate in these actions. Policemen themselves that have been taken out of the labor camps, they also confirm that they have been taken to the sites where Jews have been exterminated. But they say that they didn't take part in the killing, but they took part in the sorting of things which people left behind when they were killed. So there are no direct evidences of people participating in the killings in Kyiv. However, if we observe Ukraine in general, the tendency is opposite. So, for example, here you can see the shooting of Jews in the village of Khristinovka. It's not so far from Kyiv. And you can see on the left a German gendarme. And in the middle, you can see in the front, you can see a Ukrainian policeman with a gun who has been shooting people right now. And also the memoirs and of local people who has been living in these regions, they all signify that the local population, the Ukrainians, have also participated in the extermination of Jewish population. They have been cooperating with Germans and shooting people in certain cities, like in Mirgorod, for example, more than 100 people were killed by the local police. It's a photograph which was recently found, for example. There is even a book which was by Wendy Lauer, which was built on this photograph. It is about the extermination of Jews near the village of Miropol. It is also not so far from Kyiv and the Zhytomyr region. Wendy Lauer explains the details about people who have been killed now, who have been killing, also the photograph who originally comes from Slovakia. And on the 13th of October 1941, this Slovak military officer or soldier came to the site of the killing and took this photograph. These killings have not only been happening in 1941 and this euphoria when the German forces just came, but they also happened later. So in a lot of villages in Ukraine, there are evidences that local police has been taking part in the extermination of Jewish populations throughout all years of the German occupation. It's a map of ghettos in the Kyiv region. They have not stayed for a long time because mostly they have been exterminated quite fast. And most of ghettos were in the Kyiv region, so most of the memoirs and recordings are present in this region also. So one of the members of Kyivan police, of the officers in 1941 has published a treaty according to which everyone who lived on the territory of Ukraine, and in his case on the territory of Kyiv, have been obliged to inform the police if they see a person who supports communism, a Jewish person somewhere, and this treaty has been functioning throughout the whole occupation. Also, it is another document here, former communists, parts of Komsomol, of Soviet secret forces. They have been given such documents, and every week to 10 days, they have been obliged to come to the local police department of their district. And this organ was supposed to confirm that this person is still here, this person didn't leave the city, didn't run away into the forest. And if this person didn't come, the person was basically announced a criminal because the person has fled. Other people who have been communists, but somehow important also, so they have been already proved guilty. They have been directly sent to local investigation office or straight to the sites of extermination or to the labor camps or concentration camps. I'm sorry, not labor camps. German historian Christian Streit says that by the middle of 1941, more than around 2,400,000 people have been located in the concentration camps in Ukraine. And these people have been moved around the country, and they have been dying in the camps. Here you can see people in the Stalag 339 or Darnitsk camp, and these are mostly parts of the Red Army, people who have been part of the Red Army. And you can see on this photograph why people have so eagerly been fighting to get to the police out of the camp. And below you can see women who are behind the fence, and they're looking for their friends or relatives among the people in the camp. Around 2 million of the former soldiers of Red Army have been killed by the end of 1941. Another million was killed next year. And some specific groups of people who were exterminated by Germans, for instance, Jews, or some important figures in the Red Army or in the Soviet organs, they have been exterminated right after coming to the camp. For instance, one person who have been in this Darnitsky camp describes that from the beginning of the term of this person in the camp, torture of all Jews who have been coming has been noticed by the person. Intestines, ears have been cut off. People were cut and burned. And the author also says that Ukrainian police forces have been participating in this acts of torture towards Jews. Here you can see the site of exhumation of the remnants of the people killed in the Darnitsky camp in 1944. Another camp on the street Kerosine in Kyiv also had thousands of people there and had a special part specifically made for Jews, which was also home to torture. This camp existed until 1943, And in 1943, all people who have been there have been moved to another camp, which became the kind of the biggest site of killings and torture in the region of Kyiv. This camp has been directly led by Erich Ellinger, this person on the right. And this person is weirdly not mentioned quite often, even though this person was personally guilty in the killings of most people around Kiev from 1942. In Germany, he was first sentenced to 12 years only. Then these years were also cut down because of the bad health of Erlanger, and he peacefully lived until 2002 without any time in prison. Here is another person who was under the command of Erlanger, Paul Radomski. He was leading this Sovietsky camp, and there are cases which people describe where he was personally torturing people and killing them. So once he, for example, threw a piece of bread onto a fence which was with electricity, and then a person ran against it to take the bread and was killed by electricity. That's what one person described. And in 1943, more than 300 prisoners, mostly Jews, have been formed into one group, which the goal of which was to hide the evidence of the killings of Jews which happened before. So they have been coming to Babi Yar, and then they have been finding the people who have been killed in this camp before. They have been taking golden teeth out of their mouths, taking all left valuables which wouldn't burn, and then burning these people. One of the people who has been in the Sovietsky labor camp remembers that in one of the people who have been participating in killings there, the person recognized his former colleague before the war. And he was like, why are you here in the camp? You're not Jew, you're not communist. Why are you in the camp? So this person who was actually Jew, but this guard who was his former friend didn't know that, hoped that this person who was now a guard will help. But actually the only thing that happened between them was that the guard exchanged some bread which we had for shoes of his former colleague. And the person stayed without shoes until the end. So what was happening mostly in Kiev, that the German forces had to find Jews, find communists to take them into the camps, and local policemen, Ukrainian police forces, were actively helping in this. And Germans also left some memoirs where they are wondering why local people actually do this, why they betray, for example, their former colleagues or friends, and not back them. Like in many cases, Jews have been arrested in their private homes by someone's word that they have been there. So there are evidences of policemen in several districts of Kiev themselves arresting Jewish population of those districts. So there is one policeman, for example, who has been recording in a little book everyone whom he arrested personally. So that's a photograph of this book. It says a Jewish person, then where this person lived, then the surname of this person. This person called Furta, when he was interrogated, he said that this information was brought to him, but he didn't give this information further, which is quite weird, because in the conditions of Holocaust, having some kind of book like this as a head of local police without using this is kind of impossible. Also, it is known that this person has taken to himself private property of one of the persons who was killed in Babi Yar labor camp, concentration camp. Sorry. Also, there was one case when people on the streets have been in conflict, and Furt was kind of part of one of the parties of this conflict. And then this person, Furt, basically accused the party which was in conflict with him of being a Jew, and then took this person to the police department, and this person had to take the pants off to demonstrate that the person is actually not a Jew. So this guy was definitely not unguilty. So as you see, this local police officers, they have been recording people who have been communist Jews collaborating with Bolsheviks. They have been interrogating them and then deciding what will happen with them further. If the guilt of the person was confirmed, the person was going to the camp, was shot, or going to German organs for further decision what is going to happen to this person. About direct killings of people, there are also evidences. For example, on Lukyanovskaya cemetery in 1941, people have been killed, and one of the interrogators left some evidence. He has been telling that the first killing where he took part was happening under the command of Ukrainian nationalist policemen, and 20 Jewish people were taken to a place, and then this Ukrainian person was commanded to shoot these 20 people. So they have been taking people to a certain location, digging the ground there and shooting people. So this person who left this memoir says that he killed one man and one woman in this concrete shooting, and then took part in another shooting of 35 people, partisans, members of Soviet secret police, and Jews, also women and children. In the same manner, they were shot. Children which were small were shot by a German person. Children which were a bit older, we shot ourselves, he says. Until now, there are no other documents which could confirm this information. Some researchers have been mentioning that maybe something like that has been happening, but we haven't found documents yet that confirm. But if we remember that the heads of the Ukrainian police officers have been the members of the German Einsatzkommando 5, it kind of becomes quite logical that something like this could happen. Full-scale hunt for Jews, and the German term began in the first months of occupation, and there are memories of people running around the city and looking for Jews, and then bringing them to the police forces to be shot. And who exactly were these people, these Ukrainian people who have been running around the city and looking for Jews? We don't know. But in this document, for example, we can see what commissariat, what local police department, how many Jews it has arrested in 1942. And here is a narrative report on this. So, for instance, in Lvov, ghetto has remained in comparison to Kyiv, where it has been completely exterminated. So in Lvov, there is this document. And in Kiev, because the ghetto has been already not present, we don't have documents like this. But private arrests and killings of Jews has been happening in Kiev as well for all time of the occupation. For instance, there are some examples of one Ukrainian person arresting one Jewish person, and this Jewish person survived and then described the way the arrests happened. For instance, this person describes, this person who arrested me knew that I was Jewish because he knew my father, and then he went and told the police that I'm a Jew. After that, the agent took this Jewish person to the police office, where this Jewish person was tortured. Some teeth were kind of crushed in the mouth of the person. And there is also evidence of the same Ukrainian agent participating. Sorry, this Jewish person has been participating in the extermination of the killed already Jews, of the bodies of them in Babi Yar, together with other Jews, and then left, like fled in the end of the war, and then left the memoirs. Another person, Olga Grendel, left memoirs of this person called Vadim Makievsky, who was torturing her physically while she was in the police office. And here this Vadim is during his studies in the police school, which was organized in Kyiv in 1942. And when this person was beating the woman, German officer came and was like, what is happening? And then the woman started to tell the German officer, like, I didn't commit anything. I'm not Jew. And then Makievsky told the woman, if kind of we will understand that you're Jewish, I will personally shoot you. And then this woman has been taken to custody and taken to interrogation to the German forces, because this was not something which Ukrainian police officers did. Nevertheless, this person, Makievsky, still kind of continued entering the places where the woman was staying and beating her. Between August and September 1943, the last massive arrest of Jews has happened. Most likely, Germans has published a treaty which called for arrest of those who were most dangerous to them, communists, members of Komsomol, of the Soviet secret police, and both Ukrainian and German policemen were taking part in this operation. For instance, one group headed by Vadim Maikovsky, it's not the person on the photo, has a similar surname. This group stayed in the city almost until November, when the Soviet troops came into Kyiv, and they were identifying partisans. And when the whole police was already evacuated from Kyiv, this group stayed. This photograph, there is something written on this photograph which says that these people were the last victims of Germans, and maybe these people have been killed because of this last police force that stayed in town. 1,168,000 of Jews have been killed in the period of war, which is 60% of the whole victims in Ukraine, even though Jews have been 7% of Ukrainian population before the war. So you can see how many actually these are. Communists, partisans, and Komsomol members were much less among the victims. But we can also see how these killings were interlinked, because also communism was linked to Jewishness. It was described as pseudo-Bolshevism, like Jewish Bolshevism. So documents in Kyiv prove that hundreds of arrests were conducted by Ukrainian members of police. And now maybe we can speak a little bit about the personnel of these police forces. So, as we already mentioned, a lot of people who have been participating could be described as political activists, as one of the historians said this. So they have been collaborating with Germans due to ideological motivations. Here you can see that on the 1st January of 1942, so already after the repressions from the Germans have started, the most important positions in the Kievan police have been occupied either by Ukrainian nationalists or by immigrants, white immigrants who have been contacting with them. They are all marked yellow. Marked red are those which biography I haven't found yet, so they might be nationalists, might also not. The last part is the bureaucratic part, which was not directly doing any killings, and these people are all nationalists, more or less. Also, we know these members from the arrests and killings of Germans that happened later, when the takeover of the local organs appeared. Also, in the killings of the former nationalists, some Soviet people have also been participating. For instance, the chief of the police, which came after these nationalists, has actively participated in the killings of them. For example, I have some information that one of those persons has been collaborating with German officials and informing them about the activities of nationalists and about problems with what they did. And some nationalists have sensed that something is happening and left Kyiv in 1942. Also there is a riddle which scientists have, that Germans knew that these people in the first formation of the police, they have been nationalists. And also they knew that some of them stayed after, but not all of them were repressed. So some were able to kind of still stay as police members. And there are certain versions why it is like this, but maybe it meant that those people were not the most active members or didn't have confirmed membership of any nationalist structures, so they managed to stay in the police forces until the end of the war. For example, Anatoly Kabaida, one of these officials in Kiev, who later changed his surname to Zhukovsky, is here in the photograph on the right of from the German officer who has been leading this police department and police school in which this person studied. And this person, Kabaida, was an instructor of a police school, and then he became a leader of a police department. He was born in 1912 in the Chernigov region, and during the Ukrainian Revolution, he moved to a city which was back then part of Poland, and then he became a part of the Ukrainian nationalist movement. People have been characterizing him as a really person who believed in Ukrainian nationalism. And in 1937, he was arrested by the Soviet officials in Poland, and he has been accused of creating the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, and given 6 years in prison. But with the beginning of the Second World War, all people who have been accused because of nationalism, they have been let out of prisons. This is also weird because what we know from the west of Ukraine, that when the war began, most of similar prisoners, nationalists, they have been shot. However, in some other regions, like in Poland, they have been let out, and there is no explanation to this. They have been shot by Soviet officials. So this person joined the nationalist troops called Poleskaya Secha in the region of the North Ukraine, southern Belarus. And he has progressed in his career in the Ukrainian nationalist movement quite fast. And because of this progress, he also got to be an important figure in the Kievan police, which was formed by this nationalist forces. Here you can see a part of so that's something which he published himself, a treaty which says that a lot of Jews have been recently noticed in Kiev, and they need to be arrested and immediately taken to the German organs. And now we see him after the war on the right. He emigrated to Australia and died peacefully as an old person. So we don't know a lot about his activities. We know that he had good knowledge of German. He had good contacts with German forces because of this, and maybe that's why he stayed for such a long time as a head of local police. As a head of the police, he was getting reports every month about what is happening in the other regions. Sometimes he was heading some operations himself. And in October 1943, he was evacuated from Kyiv, but he didn't stop working with Germans. And from 1944, he was a part of one of the German troops, parachute troop, together with another Ukrainian nationalist. They have been collaborating with German secret forces, military forces. And after that, they have become a part of Ukrainian nationalist army, and then they migrated to the West after the end of the war. By the time Kabaiда became the leader of Kievan police, almost no Jews have been left in the city. But as we see here, Kabaida was still writing that some Jews are present in the city. So we can see that this ultra-nationalist, ultra-fascist views, which people had, they were closely connected with the hate towards Jews, towards Russians, Soviets, even Polish, which people continued to practice throughout the war. But similar things were present among the local Soviet population, which were also shaming their opponents on the basis of their ethnic origin. Also, we know that this fact which happened in Kyiv was not a specifically Ukrainian case. In all parts of the former USSR, we notice something similar. There is a fragment of discussion of a member of Kievan police who was a former Soviet officer, he was not a Ukrainian nationalist, for example. And you can see that Ukrainian nationalists have been present on this meeting, but this person who was a Soviet officer was actually using a more discriminating language towards Jews. So some fragments which this person has been vocalizing, they show that the person has adopted parts of the Soviet language and also the language which Germans brought to the region and have been actively using it in his own speeches and reports.
Действительно, можно было встретить тех, кто недоволен советской властью, ведь даже банально по подсчетам моим, около 70% всех рядовых
So around 70% of Kievan police officers, they have been from the villages, they had a class background and peasantry. So they have lived through collectivization, through Holodomor, and obviously they didn't like the Soviet authorities and the Stalin system. So they didn't want it to come back to Ukraine. And these people have been trying to come in connection with new local authorities. They have been trying to appear loyal. Germans have been describing how paranoid the local population is, how much accusation of each other is happening. People are writing that this and that person is a Jew or a Bolshevik. Also, there were people who, because of some events which led to that, have been brought into the police. For instance, these people from the camps who have just been trying to avoid hunger, death in the camp, and so they started to collaborate with the police. Also, there are people who were intended to go to Germany, but then at some point they have been given a chance to also choose serving in the police, and they chose it. There are also policemen who has been very well off in the Soviet period, and this group can be described as active conformists. So these people have been closely collaborating with the German forces. For instance, here is a list of the members of political department of the Ukrainian police. And we can see the nationality of people here. Most of them were not Ukrainians. You can see ethnic Germans here and Russians. And these categories of people have been mostly serving in the Ukrainian police on the head positions. A lot of them have been before members of the Soviet secret police, of the party structures in the Soviet Union. For example, Vladimir Chernyshov was a descendant of German colonists in the Zhytomyr region. He was an active party member in the Soviet period. And then he started to serve in the police. He arrested his former colleagues, also active party members from the same region. And he motivated it by the fact that communists were his enemies. And once in a private discussion, one of his friends asked him why does he hate communists even though he was a communist himself? And his answer was that during the Soviet period he had to be a communist to live fine, and his life was all about tension because he had to conceive his German origin, to conceive his real views, because in the Soviet Union Germans were often arrested, as well as other national groups. Then, as he says, our people came, so Germans, and then they gave him good life. And it was true because he was German, he was quite well off. He was getting a good supply from the Germans. So those people on the higher positions, they also usually had some legal education, maybe worked as lawyers before the war. For instance, Boris Sukhaversky was before a Soviet policeman. He was actively against the independence of Ukraine. And he was loyal to the Soviet state. And inside of the police of which he was a part, he created a group which was helping Jews and communists to escape from Germans. So there is a person called Stepan Katerinenko who left some memories about this period of time. So this group of police, it was supposed to find and liquidate the most dangerous members of the former communist organs. And this group was trying to do the opposite, so basically save the communists. And at some point, Germans have put 3 agents into this group to identify this counter movement in it. And on one day in 1943, almost the whole group was arrested and shot together with their families. For example, the Stepan at first has managed to escape the arrest. Somehow he fled German prison after being arrested. And after that, one of the local inhabitants came to the police and basically confessed that this Stepan is living somewhere in the village. And then he was arrested again and shot. So this group of Sukhaversky, which was helping communists and Jews, was the group which was the last group known as a counter movement within the police. What we know is the contrary, some figures who have their own ambitions in participating in the police. For instance, Vadim Mayakovsky, chef of Ukrainian police, was having ambitions to kind of create a new Russian state. And here we see Vladimir Anisin, his colleague, who has left some memoirs about him. So Mayakovsky, for example, after the evacuation from Ukraine in 1943, he has moved to Germany and got a job in Gestapo by an order by one of the German officers who was serving in the Kyiv SD. So this German person, when inviting Mayakovsky to serve in the German Reich, was saying that Mayakovsky is needed here like oxygen. So he's really needed. And since then, this Mayakovsky, he was trying to develop connections of the organization of Russian nationalists abroad with other nationalist organizations. And he was curating the activity of Vlasov, one of the most famous collaborants with Germans from the Soviet Union. So we don't really know how many Ukrainian policemen or Kyiv policemen of different origin have been taken out of Kyiv after the war, but there's quite many. And they have all been distributed in different parts of Europe. For example, we see that some of them became members of what is called Luftschutz. For example, here we see some of them came to Dresden in 1943. And they were supposed to liquidate in the aftermath of the bombings from air, the destruction of the city, help the civilians which were damaged. So everyone who wanted to further serve, they were offered either to join the Russian Liberation Army of Vlasov or the Ukrainian nationalist forces.
Личного состава будущей 14-й дивизии ВФНСС Галичина. Последняя находилась на стадии организации в тот момент, когда полицейские только отходили из Киева. То есть нужно понимать, что
when policemen were leaving Kyiv, a special division was being organized in Galicia, in one of the region of Ukraine. And a lot of people has joined this division, which was responsible for extermination of Jews on the way of the Ukrainian police to Germany. So, for example, here we have Arseniy Melnichuk, who was an officer of the division of SS called Galichina, which was active in this region of Ukraine. And this person was before an officer of the Kievan police. And this person was actively taking part in the local killings of Jews. In 1945, the Yalta Treaty was signed, which meant that all collaborationists were intended to be given to the Soviet party. So most of the officers have been trying to escape this, and they have ended up in different parts of Europe or even beyond. Like some have went to Australia or to Latin America or to the US. For instance, here Anatoly Kabaida, whose photo we saw before, has filled a card when he was migrating to the West. And in this card, he already has a different surname. And here, in different years throughout the war, it is described what he was doing. And it says that he was doing some building work, construction work. So there is no information on his collaboration with the police forces. And he kind of peacefully died in Australia after this. But this is not something which happened to everyone. Some policemen decided to stay in Kyiv because they saw that Germany is losing the war now, and it is weird to go with them. This policeman knew that they would be facing court, so they tried to compensate what they did during the war by joining very actively the Soviet forces when they came to Kyiv. And also, they have been so actively trying to participate in that. So in the end of the war, many of them were awarded by the Soviet Union for their heroism in the war. The Soviet court at that time was very often shooting people because of their history of collaboration with Germans and killings of local population. And we can notice that when the person was killing partisans, the person would most likely be then killed by order of the Soviet court. Then, if the person was exterminating Jews, if the person would participate in killings of the Jews, the person might also remain alive after the Soviet court.
Исправительных трудовых лагерей. Но окончательная либерализация наступила уже после смерти Сталина, когда 17 сентября 1955
So most of those people were given 25 years in labor camps,
граждан, сотрудничавших с оккупантом в период Великой Отечественной
but
войны. Это вот помогло бывшим полицейским значительно
also there was an amnesty and
например, следователь полиции безопасности Аким
in the 40s, and so many of those people have actually escaped
немецкой СД впоследствии.
any punishment for their collaboration with the police.
Но благодаря вышеупомятой
For instance, one person has got 25 years, and then the amnesty made his term in prison 10 years, and then he went out.
Этим занимались отдельно взятые немецкие соединения, в частности, сотрудники НГЗ-ГПЦ, киевского филиала.
So what we can finally say, the extermination of local population was mostly been done by local German forces.
И, как можно заключить из переданной мной информации, вспомогательная полиция практически не была замешана в убийство в городе, хотя
And the police in Kyiv
значительный вклад в уничтожение практически врагов.
has not been directly engaged in killings of local people.
Ведь пришедшие немцы часто
And most of the things which local policemen did was connected to identifying who was Jew, who was communist among local people. And basically, these were hundreds of local people whom they helped to kill in this process.
года вот эти вот задания по аресту евреев, коммунистов и так далее ложатся на плечи непосредственно украинской полиции безопасности и немецкой СД, то есть их руководителей.
So from 1942, most of the arrests were conducted by German police officials, but people were showing them who to arrest.
Персональная биография и мотивы в большинстве случаев не играют важнейшей роли в такого рода.
I can also say that personal biographies of people who were participating in arrests of Jews, communists, and other people, they were not connected to what they did. So people have been doing what they have been doing, not according to what they wanted to achieve, because they have had really different backgrounds. For example, they could have been lawyers in the Soviet Union, or they.
Это финальная фотография, как по мне, она самая показательная, потому что на этой фотографии, это тоже из группы тех фотографий, сделанных во время полицейских курсов, здесь видно сразу же под номером спереди, да, сидят 35, 36, 37, это члены ОУН, то есть Анатолий Кабальдо.
So here on the picture, you can see participants of a police school called Vyshkol in 1942. Here you can see different people who have been taking part in the local police. And here you can see former members of the Soviet secret police and Komsomol. You can see nationalists. And also there is Makievsky, who was also part of the Soviet secret police. So they have been really different people. They had really different ideological positions. So for me, it is a proof that private ideological reasons were not taking an active part in people's participation in the police organs. So thank you. Here I will end. Sorry for taking a lot of your time, more than I promised. And now questions. Так. I will look now into the chat. There are some questions. The first question is, А что за военнопленные в Житомире, за что их пленили, почему они хотели присоединиться к полиции? So, what people have been in the camps in Zhytomyr, why they were arrested, and why they decided to join the police.
Я просто не слышал, ты, наверное, переключилась на другой канал, на английский. Я просто не могу понять. Все, на русском, да, уже все хорошо. Просто какой-то у меня был interruption, скажем так. Ну, в принципе, сейчас я пересмотрю его. Военнопленные Житомирского, за что их применили? Ну, вот, как я уже сказал, в принципе, это были просто попавшие в плен.
Yeah, I already mentioned this. This were like different people from the Red Army mostly who have been arrested during the war. Yeah, and because they have been in a really bad condition in the camps, they have been ending up in the police.
Everything is okay, or
Yeah, and thank you very much to everyone who has to leave, and thank you for your thank you. And the next question, I often work with archival photo materials. Do you often meet members of the police who are smiling, or are these more like neutral or sad faces? So here you see a photograph of one of the person who was most likely taking part in the killings of communists in Sytnyk. And here the person is smiling. And I have been encountering photographs of smiling policemen quite often. It's not only about Ukrainian police departments, it's a general fact, I think. Sometimes before this operation of extermination of Jews, policemen are smiling, but usually these are daily life photographs where people are smiling because they're on a portrait photograph or they are spending some time outside of their work. So yeah, you shouldn't really, and it's hard by one photograph to assess actually the motivation of this person to smile, for example. Another question is, what literature can you advise? So the first thing maybe is a monography of Martin Din, Collaborationism and the Holocaust. It's available both in English and in Russian. I can also show it here. Yeah, you can see it here. So the most complex work on Ukrainian and Belarus police. Jan Grabowski has published about Poland, a good work. Christopher Browning also described in his book Ordinary Men how people could take part in killings of civilians. Ukrainian historians usually use his ideas to talk about the local cases. How you would explain the smiles the person is asking now in the chat? I would say that quite often it was like having a comment to do something then making what was supposed to be done. Also, there was a certain euphoria from Germans coming to save people from the Soviets. Also, the Germans were kind of motivating people by saying that Jews and Bolsheviks are basically one, and they're guilty of everything which is happening in the Soviet Union. And in Lviv, for example, there is this case when local German troops, they have killed local population, and then their relatives came and they saw that people are kind of dead there, and then Germans have accused Jews in the killings of these civilians, even though they killed people themselves. So they used certain strategies like that they were saying that local Jews were to blame for everything. So people could get motivated from different sources, and it is always really complex in each person's case. Also, one person could at first save Jews, then kill Jews, at first save them because of some private contacts, and then kill them because he had an order to kill people. So you shouldn't build any general picture from this, because that's impossible. And why people are smiling on the photographs, I don't know, like maybe there is some motivation, maybe there is a reaction to anything that is not connected to the photograph or to the police activities. So maybe some people like Zygmunt Bauman, who research what motivated people to do certain things, can answer this, but maybe not me.
Вот.
So I asked the question myself, and I was interested whether there is some political significance of the work on collaborationism, for example, how it relates to kind of revealing the complexity of the Soviet colonial situation, or maybe how it destabilizes the image of like a fascist or a Nazist as being something which is related to a certain ethnic origin of a German, that maybe it makes things more blurry and kind of more what they actually are in this case. And I just asked Daniil to summarize how he sees it.
Спасибо за вопрос. Безумно важный, на самом деле. Проблема в том, что вот ситуация с такими вот дискуссиями, она
So the problem is that in Ukraine, I think the situation with these discussions that came to some kind of a dead end. Why I started to work with this topic, because we know a lot about the police, especially about the collaboration of nationalists with it before 1942, but we don't know about it almost anything after. And a lot of people are using this in different ways in Ukraine. Like there are some right-wing people who say that Ukrainian policemen have nothing to do with the killings. There are other people like pro-Russian people who say that Ukrainian people are to blame for everything. So there is this political fight, which doesn't really lead to any adequate answer. And historians are sometimes also joining this political battle. And then they are mostly looking into what was happening before 1941 and not what was happening after. And as I already showed, what happened after, most of the leaders of the local police organs have been the Soviet collaborationists. They have not been nationalists, but nationalists also stayed partly. So I believe that academic history should not serve political goals directly. But what I see as important, as you maybe described, that there is no kind of essential view or essential image of a policeman who killed Jews and had a certain ethnic class or whatever background. So these were very educated, high-class people. These were peasants. They were Ukrainians. They were Russians. They were Germans. You cannot really say that people killed only out of certain reasons. You can only say that it was war. It was a really complicated time. It was Soviet Union was also a totalitarian regime, not only Germany was. So people were in really different conditions. So it was all very complicated, and you should reveal these complications and not simplify them to something which was usually happening in the politics. So when you are showing like this concrete people are very bad and these people are good, Soviet kind of collaborations were good and Ukrainian were bad, for example, this is not a strategy which one should take, as I believe. If someone else wants to ask something, I would translate.
I just have a small question. Like you mentioned at least 2 or 3 ex-policemen who went to exile in Australia. Is this like something you found out more often, or why Australia especially?
Спасибо за вопрос. Действительно, ну, во-первых, не только Австралия, да.
So it was not only Australia, of course. There was, for example, another person who was the most responsible for most arrests of communists in Kyiv, who was also a local person born in the region of Kyiv. And after the war, also in his migration card, he also wrote that he is not from Kyiv, that he is a stateless person, that he never worked in police. And he was, for example, allowed to move to New York. So somehow at the moment when they had the chance to decide where to move, they have been looking for some connections. Because, for example, this Gorbachevsky, whom I just mentioned, moved to New York because he had some kind of relative there. Maybe this person had someone in Australia. Usually Canada, the US, Australia were most popular destinations. Great Britain was less popular. Some stayed in Germany or France. I know certain quite big police officers who were born in Ukraine. Then in the beginning of 20th century, when the revolution started, they moved to Europe, then they moved to Ukraine for the period of war, and then they came back to Europe, like to France, for example. So they basically reunited with their families who already lived in these countries. Yeah, it was also very dependent on the question of whether the person was a citizen of the Soviet Union. So if the people were citizens of Soviet Union and they stayed on the former occupied territories after the war ended, they had to be brought back to the Soviet Union on the liberated territories. Sorry. And if people didn't have Soviet citizenship or managed to prove that they don't have it, they were given a chance to flee somewhere else, and they were not giving back to the USSR. So there is also a situation with the people who have been working as security members in the concentration camps. Some of them, they were trials, but these were like demonstration trials of several people, but most of them have actually been liberated after 10 years in prison or even less, even though they have done quite a lot of crimes to actually stay in prison for longer. So yeah, it's somehow really diverse.
Thank you. Maybe if there are no more questions, we should end it by now, because it's now 2 hours. Other questions?
Seems like no.
No. Okay, then thank you, Daniel. It was really, really interesting and well spoken. Thank you a lot. And we will upload this on the multimedia website so we can share it with a brighter audience. And yeah, thank you for everyone being here. If you have more questions about the project, you can stay maybe a second longer. And if not, bye-bye.
Спасибо всем большое, что слушали. Мне было очень приятно.
Thank you very much for hearing. It was a pleasure for me, and I'm very happy that you survived to the end. And I would be grateful and happy that the recording and also the text of the lecture will be published. And I think that someone actually had a question. It was applause, not a question.
Всем спасибо, всего хорошего, до свидания. Было очень...
Jurek, you just said in the end, we can share it with a brighter audience. Sounds like we are stupid.
No,
he meant broader.
Broader. Excuse my bad English.
That's fine, but it was, I just want to mention it. I really like to have a brighter audience.
While I was saying it, I was like, no, that's not right.
Okay, see you. I go.
Thank you for the comment.
Расходиться. Всё. Всем большое.
Да. Thanks again to everyone. If you need something, there is my email in the description of this lecture, so you can always write me with some questions about literature or something like this. I was really happy to see you. think you can stop the recording as well.
Yeah.